Imagine opening your favorite app and it's just gone. Poof. That's the reality that could be facing millions of TikTok users here in the US.
Yeah, it's a big deal. 170 million Americans use the app. So to really understand what's going on with this potential ban, we need to kind of like take a step back and look at how we even got here.
Okay, so let's rewind a bit. Why is everyone so worried about TikTok in the first place?
Well, a lot of it boils down to TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, which is based in China. And US officials are concerned about the possibility of the Chinese government getting its hands on American user data through the app.
So basically, they're worried about the Chinese government spying on Americans through TikTok.
Pretty much. They point to China's national security laws, which require companies to cooperate with intelligence gathering. Even FBI Director Christopher Wray has said he's concerned about TikTok potentially being used to compromise devices.
Yeah, I remember Senator Josh Hawley was saying that TikTok could track people's locations and even read their text messages.
Yeah.
Pretty scary stuff.
Yeah, those are some of the accusations that have been thrown around. But it's important to remember that those are accusations, not proven facts.
Right. It's good to keep that in mind. It's also worth pointing out that not everyone is on board with banning TikTok. Senator Rand Paul has been pretty vocal about his opposition, right?
Yeah, Senator Paul argues that the ban is based on speculation and not evidence. He says it could set a bad precedent for free speech. He and others see it as a government overreach.
And what about TikTok's attempt to address those concerns with Project Texas? Didn't they say they were going to store American user data on U.S. servers?
Yeah, Project Texas was their big attempt to kind of appease everyone. It was supposed to keep American user data within the U.S., but the Justice Department wasn't convinced.
So even with Project Texas, things still ended up in front of the Supreme Court. What was TikTok's main argument against the ban?
Well, their legal team argued that banning TikTok would violate the First Amendment, specifically the right to free speech. They basically said it's infringing on the freedom of expression of millions of Americans who use the platform.
That makes sense. And how did the government justify the ban to the Supreme Court?
The Solicitor General Elizabeth Prelogar argued that TikTok collects such massive amounts of data that it's essentially a goldmine for the Chinese government. She emphasized the potential risks of a foreign power having access to that kind of data.
Interesting. Were there any memorable moments from the actual Supreme Court hearing?
Well, yeah, Justice Brett Kavanaugh brought up some interesting points. He expressed concern about China potentially using that data for espionage or even blackmail.
Sounds like there was a lot at stake. So what was the Supreme Court's decision?
The Supreme Court ultimately upheld the law. They all agreed it was unanimous that China could get access to a lot of user data through TikTok.
Wow, unanimous. That's a pretty clear sign they were concerned about the government's arguments.
Yeah, it's definitely significant. But while they agreed that China could access data, they didn't agree with everything the government said. For example, they didn't say that China could manipulate the content on the app.
So there's some nuance to the ruling. Then there's Justice Gorsuch. He expressed some concerns about the First Amendment right.
Exactly. Justice Gorsuch was part of the unanimous decision, but he did raise concerns about the ban conflicting with First Amendment rights. He questioned whether the government was going too far in restricting access to a platform that millions of Americans use for expression.
It's a really good point. So we have this law that's been upheld, but with some reservations. It feels like this is just the beginning of a much bigger conversation.
Oh, yeah, definitely. This decision has a lot of implications, and it's really important to understand what happens next, right? And that deadline is coming up fast. So what happens to all those users if the ban actually happens?
It's a lot of people, 170 million. For a lot of them, TikTok is more than just an app. It's a community, a place to be creative. Some people even make a living from it.
Exactly. And for a lot of younger people, it's a primary source of news and information, too. Losing access to that would really change how they connect with the world.
But here's the thing. Even with the Supreme Court ruling, the incoming Trump administration hasn't really said what they're going to do. Didn't Trump try to save TikTok during his first term?
He did. Yeah, back then, Trump issued those executive orders trying to ban TikTok, but the courts blocked them. It sounds like he might be taking a different approach this time, though.
So maybe he won't enforce the ban. What are the chances of that happening?
It's tough to say. Trump's been pretty unpredictable on TikTok. It's hard to know what he'll do, and there's pressure from both sides. Some lawmakers want a hard ban, others are saying to be careful. It's a complicated situation politically.
Okay, so we've got the deadline, A new administration and a company under a lot of scrutiny.
Hmm.
What can TikTok do now? Could they just take the app offline in the US while they figure things out?
That's one option, but it would be a big move. It would definitely send a message and maybe give them time to negotiate, but it would also disrupt everything and possibly alienate millions of users.
It's a huge risk for them, either way.
It is. And it's not just the company that would be affected. What about all the content creators who rely on TikTok for their income?
That's true. There are millions of creators who've built their careers on TikTok. For them, losing access would mean losing money and losing touch with their audience.
Exactly. We're talking about a whole new world of content creation, a generation of influencers and even celebrities who came up on platforms like TikTok.
It would be a huge loss. It makes you think about the future of digital media in general.
Absolutely. This situation is a microcosm of what's happening in the bigger picture. It forces us to look at individual rights, national security concerns, and the power of technology.
We've talked about the impacts on users and creators, but this whole TikTok saga has even wider implications.
You're right. It goes beyond one app or one company. This is about data privacy, freedom of expression, and how the government regulates the digital world.
It feels like we're just scratching the surface. There's so much more to talk about.
Yeah, it really feels like we're at a turning point. Technology is changing so fast, and we're still trying to figure out how to balance the good with the bad. And this whole TikTok situation really highlights those challenges.
It does. It's not just about TikTok. It's about how we protect our data and our privacy in a world that's becoming more digital every day. I mean, every time you use an app or go to a website or even just use the internet, you're leaving a trail of data. The question is, who has access to it? And what are they doing with it?
It's a lot to think about. We hear about data breaches and privacy issues constantly. Is it even possible to protect your data anymore?
It's definitely a challenge, but it's not impossible. The first step is awareness. You have to understand how your data is being collected and used. Then you can start making informed decisions about the apps you use, the websites you visit, and the information you share online. So it's all about being more aware of how we use technology. But how do you balance that with all the good things about it? I mean, these platforms connect people. They encourage creativity. They even boost the economy.
That's the tough part. We need to have a real conversation about what we're willing to give up. Are we okay with sacrificing some privacy for the convenience and connection these platforms offer? And if so, where do we draw the line?
And then there's the national security issue, which makes things even more complicated. How do you protect against foreign interference without stopping innovation or limiting free speech?
It's a balancing act. We need to be aware of potential threats. But any actions we take have to be reasonable, and they can't take away our basic freedoms.
This TikTok ban really feels like a test case, a preview of how governments might handle these issues as technology keeps developing.
I think that's a good way to put it. This situation could set a precedent for how governments all over the world deal with regulating social media and protecting national security in the digital age.
It makes you wonder what role we play as individuals in all this. How do we navigate this increasingly complex digital world and make good choices?
Being informed is essential. You need to understand the risks and benefits of the technology we all use. And we need to be aware of our digital footprint and how to protect our privacy.
So basically being mindful of what we share, who we share it with, and the potential consequences.
Exactly. And having these conversations, asking the tough questions, and demanding transparency from companies and governments, that's how we can help shape a future where technology is used for good.
This has been a really interesting discussion. The future of TikTok is up in the air. But this whole situation has started a really important conversation about data privacy, national security, and how much power technology has in our lives. It's a conversation that's only going to get more important as we move forward.
I totally agree. This conversation is far from over. It needs our attention, our critical thinking, and our commitment to finding solutions that protect both our security and our freedom.
Thanks for joining us today. We hope this has given you some new things to think about. Until next time, stay curious.